So Mark, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and converse with me. We're at the Open Center in New York, where you'll be leading a talk tonight. So you're the author of many books, 17 I believe. Your best known book, #1 New York Times bestseller, The Book of Awakening. Your current book is The One Life We're Given, Finding the Wisdom That Waits in Your Heart. You've been a guest with Oprah Winfrey on her SuperSoul Sunday. You've been chosen as one of the SuperSoul 100 on her network, which is a group of inspired leaders using their gifts and voices to elevate humanity. So we'll have a lot to drill down into. I'm sure we'll have a really great talk. And before we do that, I think it'd be interesting to know about your own personal journey to where you are now.
Sure. Well, thanks. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate your inviting me into to all these web of conversations. Well, I think, in a lot of my work conveys my story because, just to start with, because I feel that the I, both the person I and the I, are the only lens we have. And so it's the way that we compare notes, because no one knows how to do this, the way we compare notes about what it is to be here, and the way that we, bearing the truth of our own journey, it allows us to experience oneness. So given that, let me share, some of my journey. I'm, what to say. I think from an early age, before I had any awareness or language, I always, when I was alone, I was never alone. In my solitude, even as a little boy, I was in the company of everything larger than me. I had no language for that. But through that solitude, I started to experience eternity, the kind of cosmic constellation and the web of ties, the connections. And so I realized I was a poet at a young age because the world, and again, I had no language for this until I was, in the early beginning of college, but, the world always spoke to me in metaphor. If I was a little boy sitting outside with the wind through the trees, the wind through the trees was talking to me about patterns. What is that like? It's like feelings through the heart. What's this? I was just always being instructed. So it was through, the first woman I fell in love with in high school who dumped me. That's archetypal, right? And it was through a broken heart, which later with my cancer journey is kind of, I think we are broken open to wholeness. I think that, as erosion is the way that nature is reduced to bear its beauty, like it or not, suffering is the way that human beings are eroded to their beauty. And so the first is a broken heart, and so I wasn't a loner, but in high school I had what we call acquaintances. I didn't have any real deep friendships till I went to college. So, being in high school and having this beautiful young woman break my heart, I didn't have any close, intimate friends to process that with, so I started writing. And expression heals. And I realized after a time that I wasn't just talking to myself. I had begun a conversation with the universe. And the poetry or the words are just the trail of that conversation. So, went through college and wanted to learn how to be a writer. Never realizing until later on that this was the vessel through which spirit was coming through me. This was the medium, the container, and it can happen in any way for anybody. You could be a gardener, you could be a mechanic. And this is what my work has opened up to, is that poetry is really not language on a page. It's the unexpected utterance of the soul that comes from holding nothing back. whether that's in our conversation here, or whether that's how someone might immerse themselves in working with wood or digging a garden.
Yeah, it's like being an open vessel.
It's being an open
whatever
vessel.
the medium is.
And so it's interesting. So here's a metaphor that's been very instructive to me. And I feel these things are teachers that show up. And then I have to decipher them or be with them and learn from them. So, almost every musical instrument, I really can't think of any, but I never say never, or always. But almost all musical instruments are hollow. Without that, there's no music. And so life hollows us out. And of course, when that happens, it feels unbearable, but we are sturdy enough to withstand that, and then we're capable of releasing music. And we are an empty vessel. We are a hollow bone, as the Native Americans would say. So, in college, I wanted to write, but at that time, this was the late 60s, early 70s, and I went to Cortland State, which is in mid upstate New York. And this is just before the burgeoning of a lot of creative writing programs. So it was kind of the old school philosophy, how dare you write until you've read everything that's ever been written under the sun. So, no one would really let me write for, to pursue it, except there were two kind of beautifully progressive professors who saw something in me, and one who was actually the chairman of the theater department, Doc Palmer. I used to call him Doc Palmer. He said, I'll let you write if you become a theater major. So there weren't independent studies yet or that kind of thing. So he shepherded me. He led me through. He said, the only thing is you can write whatever you want when you're done, but your apprenticeship is you need to write plays and learn from that. So I took all the courses in theater, except instead of traditional, we took the literature of theater, instead of a traditional paper, he would say to me, okay, we just read Ibsen, write a scene. Show me what you learned. And he said, and I had to take acting and set design and everything. And so through that, the very basics of theater have informed all of my work. But we fast forward, and I finished my doctorate. I was teaching at SUNY Albany, and in my mid-30s when I came down with a rare form of lymphoma. And that changed everything. It turned me inside out and upside down.
Yeah, I imagine that was quite a healing journey.
Well, it was, and and it was also. Again, I think that there are two ways. As I share my story, I want to pause to put it in a larger context. And I've learned that there are two major ways that human beings grow. One is through being broken open, and the other is through willfully shedding. And like DNA, like X and Y chromosomes, these are like spiritual dynamics that every person usually has a combination of both. And if we don't willfully shed, don't worry, we'll have a chance to be broken open. So I was broken open and turned upside down and inside out. And through that 3-year, the heat of that journey, which is about from 33 to 36, I had a tumor in my skull that grew to the size of a grapefruit that was pressing on my brain. And that tumor, after a gauntlet of tests and open biopsies and all kinds of things, that tumor vanished. And that was a miracle.
Yeah. So you were faced with your own mortality in a way not every person does.
Oh no, I was very much, kind of thrust to the edge, and then thrown back here, kind of spit out of the mouth of the whale of cancer, like Jonah. Then I was, within 10 months, first off, there was no normal to return to. One day I went through a door to go to a doctor to find out what was this thing growing on my head. An old friend said to me, because my former wife at the time, we actually both were going through cancer at the same time. She had cervical cancer. And so I knew I had kind of a bump on my head, but I was really focused on her, and it didn't hurt, so I didn't pay attention to it until a friend stopped me and said, you're growing a second head. You might want to check that out. And I kind of looked in the mirror differently and said, oh my God, this isn't going away. But this is what happens, again, to pause and bring a archetypal lesson, is that I've come to understand, I mean, that was a dramatic thing. And it doesn't have to be catastrophic. I mean, that gets our attention. That's the broken open part. But the willfully shedding part is, everyone who ever lives is given an opportunity to be dropped into the depth of life. And that is when the spiritual journey really deepens and opens. And we can be ushered into that through disease, loss, disorientation, anxiety, confusion, betrayal, and also by wonder, joy, surprise, being completely loved and seen. It doesn't have to be, it's not to deify suffering.
Yeah. Would you say like these two variables, broken open, willfully shed, are they symbiotic, that usually they happen together?
Yeah, I think that there are infinite combinations. And certainly that really, absolutely. I think once we are broken open, we're more aware that we can willfully shed, And so I think it's really interesting. So I was thrown back into life, but within 10 months, there was a sister tumor on a rib in my back. That, because this was so dramatic, no one had ever really noticed it, including me, and now that was growing. And so now that was when I was really in despair, because I felt, did I waste this second chance? Did I do something wrong? Now, the first time around, I had never been through anything, so I was terrified of everything. And I was so terrified of what I had to go through that it didn't really, I didn't really grasp that I could die, not in an emotional way. I mean, it was a fear, like a dark horizon. But the second time around, when I said, I'm awake, I don't need another wake-up call, then I was afraid I would die. Yeah. And I think that, the humble lesson is that in the mysterious way of the universe, there but for a hiccup of God, I could be gone and someone else would be sitting here talking to you, So there's no real answer to the question why. The only real question that's life-giving is how. The great Sufi poet Ghalib said, to try, to hear what not is there can drive you mad. To hear what is there can save you.
Yeah. Were you aware of that then? That concept?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So in a way, cancer was a big part of your awakening. That healing journey was a big part of
Cancer
your
was the
awakening?
catalyst. It's not to deify. Like, again, I think, I have a poem in which I talk about that, whatever opens us is not as important as what is opened. A tornado, a storm, a hurricane levels and opens up a field. It's the open space that matters.
Yeah.
And so, again, it could be, the things that are like beauty, wonder, love, they're more subtle, and the more difficult things are more storm-like, so they get our attention. But that was the catalyst, and yes, so that opened me, and two of the things that were transforming in that journey in my life, one is that I woke up on the other side, and I was always a heart-centered person, but before my cancer, I was talking about it from my head. And through no wisdom on my part, I woke up on the other side, and it had all dropped into my heart. So ever since then, my mind has served my heart and not the other way around. The other really impactful transformation was that I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish by Depression era atheistic Jewish heritage parents. Um, and and they get a mystical poet for a son, Um, and so I was blessed to have people from all faiths. And when I say faiths, I have a big tent. I include in all traditions and faiths atheists, agnostics, scientists, naturalists. And I had people from all walks of life offer me help.
Oh.
And so when being blessed to still be here, I was not and am still not wise enough to know what worked and what didn't. And so I feel like I was challenged to believe in everything. And so ever since then, I've been a student of all paths.
Yeah, and usually it is a synergy of many things.
Well, absolutely. I think that's another kind of important lesson that a lot of my work speaks about. My work is focused on revealing wherever possible what I believe is the common center of all paths and the unique gifts of each, and to help people, readers, participants like tonight, find where does that live in your own life? Where does that live in your own life? So one of the things that we are taught, because we live in a top-heavy culture that is a mind-driven culture, is we're taught how to analyze, sort, prioritize, and problem solve. And that's a great skill to navigate the surface world of circumstance. But if we are to live a meaningful life, what life has taught me is the deepest resources of life ask me to absorb and integrate, not to sort and choose. And so this is the difference between surviving and thriving. To survive out here, yes, I had to get on the right subway to meet you, and I had to make sure, when I got my medicine before I left on this trip, I got the right ones and I didn't swallow something that was not edible. These are, right. But if all we do is survive without thriving, what's the point? And so this is another kind of balance point, a practice that every human being has to find their own practice of surviving and thriving. And often what happens to all of us is we get so consumed by surviving that we make a god out of it. Problem solving is a great skill, but it's not a worldview. It's not a worldview. I do that so that I can absorb and integrate and find meaning and experience aliveness and oneness.
Yeah. So I'm curious, before we start digging into your work, what motivates you to do what you do?
Well, it's to be as alive as possible, and to the new book, and to live the one life I'm given as fully as possible. I started out as a young man, I mentioned in graduate school, and I so wanted to be, because poetry was the way that spirit introduced itself to me, that I so wanted to be a poet that I thought, gee, if I work hard, maybe over time I could write one or two really good poems, And then cancer came along, and forget writing great poems, I needed to discover true poems that would help me live. And now in my 60s, I want to be the poem. The words are just the trail.
Yeah.
The poetry is the means of apprehension. It's not a product. So even my sense of great art has changed. Great art isn't in any form excellent work or a beautiful piece of art or sculpture or dance. Great art, I think now, is the person who encounters it is transformed for having been in relationship to it, not whether it's an excellent product.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you. So your first, not your first book, but that very well-known bestseller book, The Book of Awakening, Oprah Winfrey really played a nice part in
Oh my
helping
goodness,
propel
yes,
it.
yes.
So what does the book teach?
Well, the Book of Awakening is a spiritual day book. That is, there's an entry for every day of the year. and it's a collection of small doses of what matter. And how that came to me, and through it I have gathered through stories, through personal questions, through the quotes of all other teachers. It's been a funnel, if you will, for all the traditions. And what led me to that was that, you know, when I was out of my cancer journey, and I have dear loved ones in my life who have either have been the children of alcoholics or recovering alcoholics, so I'm very familiar with the 12-step program and some of the lessons of that. And so I started to realize, you know, I would see around me these day books, Melody Beattie's, you know, classic, you know, Codependent No More, and you know, and I would see people in that world, and then not just in the recovery rooms, but all the lay kind of recovery rooms, whatever it might be, where people gather. These kinds of books were used. They were beat up. They were in cars. They were in bathrooms. They went everywhere with people. And so it occurred to me, like being on the other side of my cancer journey, wanting to give back in some way, knowing that what I went through was not unique to me. I thought if I could fill this form, to me it was like a spiritual sonnet. If I could fill this form of these small passages or doses of what matter, it might be a way to give back. So it sounds like it's a small, you know, at first it sounds like, you know, there's a little entry for every day of the year. So it sounds like a small, well, my God, it was a huge endeavor because there's 365. And it took me, you know, 3 years to really surface and write all of that. And then it took me another year to kind of revise it. And also, you can enter it anywhere, but it also has a journey if you do go every day of the year. And so I was living in Albany at the time, and in a beautiful apartment on Washington Park. I don't know if you know Washington Park in Albany. I love that park. And so my wife, we weren't married then, but my wife Susan had got me one of these huge year-long planners that you can erase and mark up, and I taped it to the wall and just lived with it for a year, organically, like seeding a garden, saying, okay, so if this is a journey, where do these, I got 365 of these, where do they go? And I put one here, and then I come back a day later, oh, maybe this one goes over here. And then it started to fill in. And then that was, you know, originally published in the year 2000. And, you know, it was 10 years later that Oprah kindly discovered it. And of course, that just was, you know, a remarkable spreading of everything.
Yeah, I mean, the spreading of awakening.
Yes.
Yeah, which is an interesting point, because at one time, awakening was only available to mystics and serious religious devotees, and now, so now things are different. Would you say awakening is potentially available to anyone?
Well, I think it's always been available to anyone, and I think like anything, it really, over those 10 years, had like a word of mouth following that would grow, and grew pretty well for that. And of course, when Oprah, you know, supported it, it just went all over the world. But, you know, I've always been committed to being as accessible as possible. This is another lesson from going all the way back to the theater training, because the difference between theater as a written form, written/performance form, and other writing is that, you know, you take someone like T.S. Eliot, who was brilliant, but T.S. Eliot went like this. He said, he was between you as the reader and the poem, and he'd say, oh, can't you see this? Can't you see this? Meanwhile, he's in the way. Whereas the very nature of theater is there's you, there's the stage, and there's the playwright. You are obliged to put things out between you, between us. And this has been a fundamental thing I think about, and that's why I write so personally too, because I believe, as I said earlier, that not only is my life my only lens, but I believe that when I can be honest and authentic, I offer an example, not an instruction. And if it touches anyone, it's because we are at the center the same. So this is the difference between significance and meaning. Significance is only when I talk about that the first woman I fell in love with had auburn hair, and I remember her eyes, and where we went to dinner when I was 18. Those are significant details to me, but unless I share the feeling they bring in view, then we're talking about meaning. Then if I talk about it with that depth of feeling, then that detail will bring up whatever color of hair was the first love that you had. And then we're touching. So there's a commitment to bring up the example of our own lives so that we can share our common humanity.
And that's really what's so important, sharing, because that unites us, understanding our
Well, and this is the role, this is also another role of great love and great suffering, is that when we suffer, our heart is open to another level of compassion. Having gone through almost dying from cancer, I can never close my heart to anyone who's going through a life-threatening situation, or even more simply or more normally. When I was younger and I'd be in a grocery line and there was an older woman shuffling in front of me, and I would, quietly to myself be impatient, like, oh, for God's sakes, come on, come on. Well, then, I mean, I'm in my 60s, but, and my back is fine. But you know how sometimes we throw our back out, and through exercise or doing yard work, I can't remember, but I threw my back out for the first time, and now all of a sudden I'm shuffling. Now the next time I see that old woman or her counterpart in the grocery store, now I'm no longer impatient. I go and help her because I know what that feels like. I know that she's taking small steps because she's in pain. So this is I think the difference between and the difference, I think, between those of us who are wise and those of us who are not, and we all take turns, is that when we can face what we're given to work with, and own our own pain and our mistakes, that makes us wise. When we deny it, then we're not wise, and then we project it and play that pain out on others.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talk about the relationship between awakening and the turbulence of being alive, so that's part of it, that interplay.
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. I believe that that heaven is here on earth, and it's in this messy, magnificent incarnation of being human. That it's through the life of feeling is what connects the everyday with the eternal. And since the beginning of time, human beings have wanted to, understandably, nobody likes pain, nobody likes fear, nobody likes the difficult things, but they all come as a whole. Life, the resource of life, the water of life, is one indivisible whole. And somehow life has been made just difficult enough that we need each other. I think, to ensure the journey of love.
Yeah.
So let's take water. We all know that water, we learn at an early age, water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. Well, I can't say to you, I just like the hydrogen, please. Because even if you could separate it, it would no longer be water, and it would no longer be quenching. And joy and sorrow, and pain and safety and fear and love, everything comes in a unified water of life. And part of our incarnation is to drink that water and not drown in the difficulties, but be restored by the wondrous things. And we need each other to do that.
And that's where, talking about the unity of all paths, it's all about sharing the human experience and awakening from the suffering.
Absolutely, and that's where compassion literally means to be with. It means to keep honest company. Often, and I learned that, we all learned this, but I learned this years ago from my wife, who, this is, I'm sure, a typical story you'll hear, but, she was, I can't remember what, but she was going through something that was difficult and painful, and she was telling me about it. And it was painful for me to hear her be in pain. And so I was trying, with good intention, to take that pain away, to solve the problem, to do something. And, halfway into the conversation, she stopped and she said, you don't want to feel what I'm feeling. And I was, at first offended because I said, I'm trying to help. And I was ready to, say, what are you saying? When, for whatever reason, in that moment, and this is an important moment for all of us, I saw it outside of my own story. And I said, you're right. You're right. I need to listen to you. I need to share your pain. And this is something, let's take it for a minute and talk about, I have a good friend who's a remarkable person. That would be a great person to interview. Ed Tick.
Oh, I know Ed.
Do you know Ed?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Ed and I started out as young poets together in Albany many years ago. But Ed understands this deeply about the life of veterans. And that, in traditional, he has recovered and shared and uncovered that in indigenous traditions, in ancient traditions, that the pain of veterans, of warriors who went to war for the tribe, regardless of the reason, when they came back, just as each of us, like my wife was asking me to share whatever pain she was going through, there would be tribal circles where those warriors would talk about the horrors they'd seen and been through and felt, so that the pain could be distributed and not held just by them. And Ed talks beautifully about how that's needed today. That Veterans Day, which is today, rather than having it be a holiday that we shop, we should be in story circles to help distribute that pain.
Yeah, that's really wise. Yeah. So I want to talk. We'll delve into your new book, The One Life We're Given. You also have perhaps a reading from it that will.
Sure.
Yeah. So before we do that, at the front, I want to ask you. At the front of the book, you have a quote from Liu Yen, and the quote is, "Before practicing the art of immortality, practice the art of humanity."
Yeah.
And I think we've been talking about that, but I'll just ask you to say a little more on that.
Well, yeah, because the only way to experience, and let's talk about immortality, and we kind of have been taught a cartoon of immortality and eternity. We at a young age we're taught that means, stacking up years on top of each other for eternity. I think experientially, eternity and immortality are moments of the way a drop of water ripples. When we can be in a moment together, or when we experience life fully, however briefly, where we are at one with whatever it is we're feeling, whether that's love or suffering, then that ripples out. And that fullness, where that ripples from our heart into each other and into all of life, that moment of oneness is an experience of eternity. And the only way to experience immortality is through our humanity. It's through our humanity. And so there's another quote in the beginning of the book by Rilke, that says, when all I wanted was to sing, I was when all I wanted was to sing, I was accorded the honor of living. And the reason I put those together is because there is a clue, there is a suggestion there by Rilke of how we practice humanity to experience immortality. And that is, I wanted to sing, but actually what does that say? Living is singing. When we can inhabit it. This is something, I'm interested in word origins, not because I'm a word geek, but because I've discovered that the origins of words tend to be more whole, and they are fragmented over time, and meanings get divergent. And here's a great example. The word perfect, it did not originally mean without flaws or without mistakes. The word perfect originally meant thorough. Thorough. wow, that changes. There's a fork in the road in 2,000 years of education. It's not, the idea is not to be perfect or without mistakes or flaws, but through wholeheartedness to live thoroughly. And that will enable us to experience not only our life, but each other and the oneness of experience.
Yeah. Yeah, linguistics is a very fascinating study because as you're pointing out, over time, words get kind of a boundaried and finiteness and lock us in.
Well, another word is the word intellectual originally meant the capacity of mind and heart. It didn't mean just mental. And that has been frayed. And in Elizabethan times, the word daemonian, it meant angel and trickster, as the Native Americans speak about. It meant challenging angel as well as supportive angel. And it was in Elizabethan times that it was split into angel and demon. And we've had trouble bringing that back together ever since.
Yeah. So I want to ask you another question, then perhaps we'll give you that some reading. So in the book, you say that each person is born with a gift, and our calling is to find it and care for it. So what are some of the ways to care for it?
Well, I think the first thing is, and I use in that same passage, again, a metaphor that appeared as a teacher to me. So let's start with that. And that is the metaphor of a match, a wooden match that we light a fire with, that we light a stove with. And we all know that in the tip of that match, the flame is dormant. It doesn't reveal its light or warmth until it strikes against the surface. And the metaphor that's the teacher is that every person's gift is like the flame dormant in that match. And the light and warmth of our gift doesn't reveal itself until we strike our gift against the needs of the world. Now, how do we do that? Well, I think that, the first thing, and these are all variations of this very basic, simple and difficult thing to maintain, and that is to be completely present. Worry, fear, pain, push us away. That's how they say hello. And our job is then to lean back in, to hold nothing back, to be completely present to whether it's beauty or difficulty or what's before us. And when we can do that, we have a chance to be in conversation or in relationship with the world. So I know that there are a lot of monastic traditions, and there's certainly, my experience is, and this is not to say one is good or one is bad, but my experience is that there's a rhythm between solitude and community that is necessary. And that it is only in the Jewish tradition, in many traditions, God appears and meaning is gathered through relationship. That gift has to be struck against the needs of the world. We have to be in dialogue as we are now, because we're more together than alone. Plato said we are born whole, but we need each other to be complete. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And how do we do that? Well, nobody really knows, but we keep trying. We keep learning. And this is why it's so important that the things we're talking about, that we keep them alive, that we keep comparing notes on how to practice the art of humanity, and how to keep honest, heartfelt company. This leads to something that I like to talk about as the practice of return. That my experience on earth is that I don't believe, or I haven't experienced to this point, that there's a permanent state of enlightenment. I believe that being human, we're like, we carry lightning in a bottle. The being is infinite and the human is very finite. So, we are constantly, I'm awake and then I fall asleep. I'm sensitive and then I'm numb. Today, if we're having tea and your cup starts to fall off the table. I might be agile enough to catch it before it reaches the ground. But tomorrow, I could spill it on you because I'm human. And so, we are born with an innate trust in life, and we will lose our trust in life because we will get hurt, we'll feel betrayed, we'll experience loss, we'll have grief, our dreams won't come true. But that's where the practice of return. Every human being is challenged to personalize their spiritual practice of return. When we lose trust, how do we restore trust? When I fall asleep, how do I wake up? When I'm numb, how do I become sensitive? When I'm half-hearted, how do I become wholehearted? And while I feel like my work as a teacher, as a writer, as a fellow being, is to point up all of those choice points, but I can't tell anyone what their personal practice of return is. We all have to discover that together and individually.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good point, and bring up enlightenment, that there's the spiritual dimension of enlightenment, awakening, and the spiritual emotional come together. So you bring in trust, like having trust, losing trust, and having to regain it, understand, and it's an evolving dimension.
Well, one of the things that I've learned, and I know all these things because I violate them all the time,
That's how it's a good teacher then.
Oh, it's the best teacher. But it's understand. This is where compassion for our journey. I think one of the things that's difficult, that we make things difficult, is that we're constantly judging ourselves and others. Like the language of judgment is just not helpful because it's not specific enough. Good, bad, left, right, up, down, light, dark, right, wrong. That's not helpful. It's course correction. I'm asleep. Oh, I got to become awake. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. So I think I lost that thought there.
Well, this is a good time then, Mark, to we'll delve into a reading.
Yeah. So this
from
is
The One Life We're Given.
Yeah, and so let me say that the subtitle of the book is Finding the Wisdom That Waits in Your Heart. And I had a good friend who, as I was writing the book, said, well, if the wisdom's in our heart, then why do we have to find it or wait for it? But we've been talking about that because it's dormant. And so one of the things I've learned is that each soul, each life is like an inlet. And what's within us and what's outside of us, when we can inhabit the one life we're given, we let what's out in and what's in out. So, you and I are sitting here and we're breathing, and the air in my lungs begins, I guess, is my air, but there's all this air, and you've been breathing, and now we've exchanged. I have your air in me and mine in you. So whose air is it anymore? Well, that's part of the wisdom that's released in our heart. When we are thoroughly ourselves, we become everyone. So this is a little story that comes from the book, which came to me. A troubled widower made his way to ask a wise old woman about his troubles. The old woman received him, and they walked along a stream. She could see the pain in his face. He began to tremble as he asked, "What's the point? Is there any meaning to life?" She invited him to sit on a large stone near the stream. She took a long branch and swirled it in the water, then replied, "Well, it all depends on what it means to you to be alive." In his sorrow, the man dropped his shoulders, and the old woman gave him the branch. "Go on," she said, "touch the branch to the water." As he poked the branch in the running stream, there was something comforting about feeling the movement of the water in his hand through the branch. She touched his hand and said, "You see that you can feel the water without putting your hand in the water. This is what meaning feels like." The man grew tender but still seemed puzzled. She said, "Close your eyes now and feel your wife gone. That you can feel her in your heart without being able to touch her. This is how meaning saves us." The widower began to cry. The old woman put her arm around him and said, "No one knows how to live or how to die. We only know how to love and how to lose, and to pick up branches of meaning along the way." And that's what we're doing. That's
Yeah.
what we're doing here in our
Yeah.
conversation.
The art of humanity.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You talk about courage. Well, you have a book, Finding Inner Courage.
Yes.
And I remembered I interviewed the writer, former priest Matthew Fox, a while back, and one of the things he talks about is the first sign of spirit is courage. So courage is such an important thing. You were talking about,
Yeah.
like understanding who we are, the one life we're given, and really coming to terms with the things we run away from. And that takes courage.
Yeah, so let's talk about courage a little bit. So let's back up and let me just say that, I think as a writer, a seeker, a learner, that I only, and I think most authors do, if they admit it, I write about what I need to learn, not what I know. If all I wrote about was what I knew, I would have written very little. And some people have thought that I was courageous because I survived cancer. Well, most people who are told that they're courageous go, huh? I don't know, I just did what I needed to do to be here. I guess so, if you say so. And, I think that courage always comes, I don't think courage appears unless there's fear. And this is, again, this messy mix of being human. And so I wrote this book on courage because no matter however people thought I was courageous, we always have an edge. And I was at the edge of all I knew about courage. And I felt a need in me to learn how to be more courageous. And this is the way I learn. Each book is an inquiry. But what gave me a way into this book was learning that, and this is, again, the Latin word for courage, cor, C-O-R, means heart. But the original idiom, the way it was first used, courage meant standing by one's core. And that gave me a way into this book, because if the things that we think of as courage, like running into a burning building and saving others' lives, and if these actions are courage, they are like the flowers and bushes and trees that break ground. But standing by one's core is the soil out of which those actions grow. So what I mean by inner courage are the quiet braveries that allow us to be who we are everywhere, that allow us to remove the veils and cataracts that grow between us, so that we can truly behold each other. Thomas Merton, one of the many beautiful things he said, if we truly beheld each other, we would fall down and worship each other. So courage, when we talk about standing by one's core, so let me use the image of a mountain. If we see a mountain on the horizon, it stands up, it's prominent. Well, if we get closer to it, it's hard to know, if you were to look at the earth, where does the mountain stop and the earth begin? You can't know. But the mountain is there because it is standing on its core, which is connected and standing on the core of the earth. Well, this is a teacher and helps us understand what we mean by inner courage. Because when I stand by my core and have the courage to stand on my foundation, then I am not just standing, it's not just me. Like the mountain on the earth, I am aligning now with the foundation of all being, and the foundation of oneness, and the foundation of all the souls that have ever lived. So my courage comes because, being authentically who I am, I have now aligned with the foundation of all being. And I have an example from that's in the book that was a great teacher to me recently. My father passed away 3 years ago at the age of 93.
And you write about that.
I write about it a lot. And we had been, during our adult lives, estranged for many years. And then we thankfully became close in the last 6 years of his life. And so I was, my brother, who lived nearby, had a constant, very close relationship all through all those years, and he really cared for my father day in and day out. And I lived 1,000 miles away, and I would come for days at a time and back and forth when I could. And so during the last year of his life, I was with him many times, but this time he was in a hospital, and I was alone with him, and I found myself, like many times, I'm sure many people can identify with this, there I was feeding my father applesauce. He had had a mild stroke and was very frail, 92. And here I am feeding him applesauce. And it was such again, life comes as a whole. It was such a beautiful, sad, bittersweet moment. And I became so, working with what we're given, my heart said, I just gave myself over. I said, everything has to be here in this moment. Everything. And I gave him everything to it. I wanted that spoon not to touch his teeth. I wanted not to disturb his breathing. And so all of a sudden he and I everything was in this repeatable moment of slipping the spoon of applesauce into his mouth and letting him try to swallow it. And then this amazing thing happened. All of a sudden we tripped, because we were so thoroughly there, we tripped into a moment of wonder. Here we were, he's dying, he's had a stroke, we're in a hospital, and all of a sudden it was wondrous. And the next thing that happened, which is still teaching me, is that because I felt what was my feeling given to me to the bottom of my heart, to the bottom of my personality, now all of a sudden I tripped into where I felt like I was in the moment of every child that ever fed a dying parent. I wasn't alone. As I was doing this, I felt this mystical sense of everyone, everywhere, throughout time. I fell into that mystical community. And what it started to teach me, which I'm still exploring, is that I think that when what we can feel is to the depth of all that we can feel, we trip into the well of all feeling. And that's where resilience starts to show itself.
And it reminds me of that phrase, the chapter in your book, The Career of Awakening, because it's being present, being mindful, being awake in the little things, feeding applesauce to a dying father.
Well, and this is where Blake's famous line, you can find eternity in a grain of sand.
Yeah.
And again, that practice of return, because being human, we can't stay there all the time. But we can return. And that's what I remembered now that I wanted to say earlier, that one of the things that's understandable that all human beings do is we take our experience and we try to make a worldview out of it. So if I'm broken or confused, then, I want to paint the world as a broken, confused place. But what I've learned is the sun doesn't stop shining because I'm blind. And the world, I learned this through my cancer journey, that to be broken is no reason to see all things as broken. I need to feel what is mine to feel. And this is a deeper sense of what it means to be in the moment. When we talk about being in the moment, which is rightfully done these days, but to really understand what that means to me, is by being in the moment, it doesn't mean that we divorce ourselves from responsibility or from the larger web of things. It means that I'm so present that I feel what is mine to feel completely. One of the rewards for that is that I experience oneness. But the other deeper experiencing of the moment is that I experience what's mine, but also in the moment, life is still continuing. So, when I'm in pain, the sun hasn't stopped shining. Somewhere else nearby, a child is being born. Somewhere else, someone is discovering who they are. Someone else is making love for the first time. All of these things are happening at once, and our challenge is not, what we tend to do as human beings, which is understandable, is when I'm in pain, I want to make the whole world painful. Or the other way, if I realize that, it's not there's more going on than my pain. Now I want to minimize my pain. Well, this doesn't matter. And I think our challenge is to give credence and legitimacy to what our experience is, and to let everything else in, because the truth is, when I'm in pain, I need the company of someone who knows what it's like to be in pain, but I need everything that's not broken in the world to heal. If I'm in fear, I need the company of someone who knows what it's like to be in fear, but I need everything that's safe and not fearful to heal me.
Right, and to help not be stuck in that story of the pain,
Yeah.
finding the courage to move past that pain.
So part of the courage, which speaks to where we are now in our current situation, after the election, is
And we're filming this a few days after the
few days after
2016 election.
the election of Donald
tumultuous
Trump as
time.
president, and is that, we need, one of the quiet courages that decency has always been based on is the courage to let in other views than our own, and the courage to realize that we are each other. The courage to realize that we are each other. And half of our nation has elected someone who, and I believe this is below politics, this is below Democrat and Republican, below conservative and liberal, has elected someone who sees whoever is different as the enemy, who has based his position in the world on fear and hate, and who sees strength as vengeance. So what that says to me, it speaks to me on two levels, because imagine each of us is like a tree, a big redwood that's rooted. Well, the part of me that lives in our time is in great turbulence because of all this. And the part of me that is rooted in all time is trying to look at it as well. So the part of me that is in our time, I can't fathom how 50 million people could choose a person to lead us who is amoral and has such an unstable character. The part of me that lives below our time says that half of our nation is in great pain and fear, and is pushing away anything that's different. That half of our nation is severely wounded, and out of that woundedness has made a terrible choice. And the part of me that is of Jewish heritage, that lives in our time, fears that this echoes the circumstances of 1930s Germany. And that it feels today, we're only a few days away, but it feels to me that all the things like our conversation, all the ways that we are authentic, all the ways that we value and treasure truth and caring, and the ways of the heart, the literacy of the heart, mean more than ever now. And that we must not hide or stop from voicing the truth of our experience or the truth of the heart. If we are on the verge of a dark time, in the Middle Ages, the monks kept literacy alive during the Dark Ages. And if we are on the verge of a dark time, our challenge is to keep the literacy of the heart and spirit alive through this time, and not to, we do have fascism and the Holocaust to look back on. And so we need to be, I think, and I'm saying this as much for myself as we're just kind of discovering this a few days out, to be as vocal and as watchful as possible for the signs of where this might turn.
Yeah. So it's wonderful that you are speaking out now, that your books, your teaching, because there are a lot of people who are broken open right now. So you can help them to find that light. And it reminds me of the saying from Robert Frost that the only way out is through.
Yes.
So we need our sages and guides like you to help us
Oh, well,
go
thank you.
through.
You know, I hope it's helpful. You know.
Yeah. So I want to thank you, Mark. What is next for you and your scheduled teachings and writings?
Well, I'll be, you know, we're here in November, and I usually take December through February as my annual sabbatical. I'm finishing some new books, and actually I have a book that'll be coming out in 2018 about community.
Oh, great.
About
Great.
moments of community throughout history and how they work, how moments of how we work well together. And then in March I'll be out, you know, teaching again and being with folks.
Great. And if people want to know what you're doing, your schedule.
Oh yeah,
or
people
what's
can look to
best-
my website, marknepo.com, and there's a sister website, 3 Intentions, the word spelled out, all is one word, 3intentions.com, and that has all of the places I'll be teaching and speaking.
Oh, okay. So marknepo.com or 3intentions.com.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. We could talk longer, but
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for letting
thank
me be
you.
a part of
Thank you.
this.
Yeah.